Good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you interactive, timely, and engaging education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome you all to another edition of our longest running series, the Committee Insights, today being presented by NCIA's Marketing and Advertising Committee. Before we get started, a quick note and thank you to our guests currently joining us for the limited preview on our Facebook live stream as well. If you're an active NCIA member, follow the short link in our description to log into your account and join the conversation this afternoon. If you're not an NCIA member, follow the Join Now link to activate your membership or the Register Now link to purchase a discounted pass so you don't miss out on this invaluable programming being presented today. Now, let's get this show on the road. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by members of our Marketing and Advertising Committee for an advanced session on digital marketing strategies. Our panel of experts will discuss compliance as it relates to digital marketing strategies, terms of service disasters and successes, and how the ever-changing regulations require you to be prepared to pivot from your original plans. I know our audience is eager to dive into today's information. Our panel is ready to start the conversation, so let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's session, Amy Larson, the Vice President of Marketing at Simplifya, to the virtual stage. She's going to be introducing our panel of esteemed experts. Thanks for joining us today, Amy. You can take it away, kick it off from here. Perfect.
Thanks so much. Great to see you again. As Brian mentioned, I am the Vice President of Marketing at Simplifya. I've been involved in NCIA for about 4 years. I've worked in marketing and cannabis here in Colorado since late 2014, early 2015, when Colorado's adult use market opened up. I am also very proud to be the chair of the marketing committee this year, and am honored to have this incredible panel of experts here with us today. First up, I'd like to welcome Jon Lowen. Jon's the co-founder of Surfside. Jon, why don't you give us a quick intro?
How you doing? Jon Lowen, one of the co-founders of Surfside. Surfside is a end-to-end marketing platform. We focus on helping brands, dispensaries, other ancillary businesses within the cannabis space retain their customers and acquire new customers through digital marketing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jon. Next up, I'd like to welcome Bryan Elliot with Cookies.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Brian. I'm the VP of Marketing for Cookies Retail, and I'm going to talk about myself and Cookies Retail for a long period of time coming up. So I'll hit a lot of points when I get there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. And last but definitely not least, Mikaela McLaughlin.
Hi, Amy. Thanks so much. My name is Mikaela McLaughlin. I'm the VP of Retail Business Development at Springbig. Springbig is the leading loyalty and text message solution built specifically for the cannabis industry. We're fully HIPAA certified, and we work with over 1,700 dispensaries across North America and engage with over 28 million cannabis customers through our dispensaries network. Really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, Mikaela. So a quick intro to the conversation. I know Brian gave everyone a quick overview. Obviously, we have some really top-notch experts here to talk about the advertising technology. We all know how complicated it is in cannabis and how those regulations always change. And, thanks to Google and Facebook and Instagram still not letting us do any advertising, we have to get very creative in how we actually get to those consumers. So we're going to start the conversation today with some information from Mikaela and Springbig. Now, Mikaela, I know, we kind of joked initially in our conversations. I'm one of those people where I hate, I hear text messaging advertising and, you kind of cringe, but it's such an odd, it's such an incredible success for the cannabis industry. And I'd love for you to talk about, some of the way you guys are overcoming challenges and the way you're serving up really incredible results for your partners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. Really excited to be here. Thank you to all of our attendees for hopping on. Hope that this is informative for everybody. Yeah, it's funny, I think just to kind of start off, I like to preface by saying, yes, like text messaging is not taboo, especially in the cannabis industry. And one of the things that the panelists and I were talking about that I think is so cool about text messaging in particular is cannabis retailers have known for 4, 5, 6 years that text messaging is such an effective way to run data-driven marketing. And so it's actually been fun to see this kind of role reversal, because normally the cannabis industry is trying to keep up and trying to get access to all of the normal marketing that any old retailer or brand would be using. So to see retailers be so ahead of, or cannabis retailers be so far ahead of the Nordstroms and the Whole Foods of the world has been really, really cool. They've known for a long time that texting works, and now we're seeing more and more traditional retail start to follow suit. I think this shift in marketing for cannabis in particular is, people don't want to miss out on deals, specials, promotions. And when I think most people know Springbig from our retail platform that helps the dispensary enroll customers. And about 18 months ago, we started getting a lot of requests from cannabis brands that were really interested in finding a way to communicate with their customers. And we had a little bit of a light bulb moment when we realized that the brands really lack the direct to consumer access to build their own database, which is how you're successful in text marketing, is having people to text message. So kind of with that pain point in mind, we envisioned this kind of new way for brands to text, and the Brands by Springbig platform currently allows brands to partner with the retailers that are already carrying their product to sponsor the image portion of their MMS message. So what we know about texting is that most retailers are already doing it, and they're already talking about these brands in particular. So it was a natural next step to say, hey, let's create a platform that kind of merges these two, lets the brand use the database that the dispensary is already created. And it's also nice because it kind of serves as a little bit of an endorsement, if you will, because that advertisement is coming right from the dispensary that customer knows and trusts, which we see makes them a lot more willing to try a brand that they may never have heard of because their favorite dispensary is highlighting it in that day's text message. If you don't mind moving over to the next slide, I think that this idea of like list ownership is something that's important. And in this model for how we built Brands by Springbig, really focusing on the fact that TCPA compliance is a very real concern when it comes to text messaging, ensuring that every single customer that's enrolled has proper consent to be text messaged. And in addition, they have the ability to opt out at any time. So our solution that enrolls customers is fully TCPA compliant. We can collect an actual signature for customers when they enroll. So if that customer comes back in 5 minutes, 5 months, or 5 years and says, hey, I didn't give you permission to text me, we have that signature, the IP address. And again, building a database of customers to text is hard work. It's a little bit of a headache. And this model of the brands communicating through their retail partners, it takes a lot of that headache and the heavy lifting of the database management off of the brands, and it keeps it with the retailer who is already great at doing this to begin with. So we definitely see that as a huge asset of the software. And to scoot along to the next slide, I think that looking at some of the results of these messages would be just kind of a really compelling story to tell. So in this case study that we're looking at here, this was a message where Green Thumb Industries partnered with a retailer that carries their Incredibles product. They were relaunching their packaging and they were really excited to get word out. And so over on the left, you can see that we're actually comparing the number of units that Incredibles sold in the same amount of time before they ran that sponsored campaign with their retailer. And in the period before they had advertised to that customer base, they had sold 52 units. And in the exact same amount of time after those impressions into those users' smartphone, they sold 576 units of the Incredibles product. And the difference in revenue obviously speaks for itself. It's a 900% or over 900% increase in the revenue generated. But check out the fact that they had 302 new customers. That means people that had never tried their brand made a purchase. And of course, you know, the hope, every brand is putting their best product forward, and hopefully that's going to turn into a repeat customer. And we're really seeing that the impact of brand sponsored messages is bigger than just the brand benefiting. Retailers are benefiting so much from this because it's helping move retailers away from that kind of Groupon race to the bottom mentality that we've seen in text marketing before, where every day the promo is 5% steeper, or every day there's more bonus points. And it's steering retailers to a content driven messaging approach. And that's really what Springbig has known all along is successful in text marketing. But retailers have historically lacked the marketing bandwidth to have a content catalog of beautiful images so that they can use a different image every single day. So the brands are able to provide the images for their brand right to the retailer. The retailer can pick them up and use them in the message. And it helps offset some of the costs for the retailer. So in addition to helping minimize this kind of huge marketing expense for the retailer, it's also helping beef up their content and giving them unprecedented access to really, really beautiful campaigns. And then moving on to the next slide, one thing that I really want to highlight that's important is data. How is the marketing that you're doing working? And having the access to data is so important to know what campaign worked, how well it worked, and really track that. Because Springbig's retail engine is integrated with the retailer's point of sale, we're able to unlock the transactional details to the brand so they can learn more about new customers they generated, who they were, how many units of product these customers usually buy. So I'm really excited for what that has meant for brands and retailers, because the more access they have to information, the better they can do at identifying customer trends, identifying future opportunities for their brands. And so we're really excited about this kind of transition into helping brands at Springbig. And I'm really excited to hear from the other panelists about the expert suggestions that they have. But yeah, that's kind of it for me on the Springbig side. Amy, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. And like I said, excited to hear from everybody else.
No, Mikaela, thank you so much. And it really is kind of fascinating being able to track that data and track that ROI. I actually was just having a conversation on LinkedIn about, you know, somebody couldn't figure out why marketing could not give him an ROI for the ads that he was buying. And, you know, we all know how complicated that is, but tools like this with this kind of data really are such an incredible tool for us as marketers to have in our back pocket. So thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So I want to transition real quick to Bryan Elliot with cookies to give us some insight from, you know, kind of how cookies as this, you know, obviously nationally known brand, how they deal with advertising from a slightly different perspective with their brands and their social media account. And I think it's a really great case study for how, nothing is one size fits all, especially in this industry. And I think Bryan's perspective on how Cookies is addressing things and meeting those challenges, I think will be really interesting for our attendees to take into consideration as they put their plans together. So Bryan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Amy and Mikaela. Great setup. So quick intro to Cookies. I mean, Amy called it out. We're a pretty recognizable cannabis lifestyle brand, one of the top, premier ones in the US and maybe the world even. Before I get into Cookies too much and my role, I have to explain the relationship of Cookies Retail. So I work for Cookies Retail, which is the largest, MSO franchise operator of the Cookies brand. So there's a separate, company and team that runs the brand itself, that Berner is the CEO of and founder. So we have a, kind of agency relationship with them. Like a lot of times, like they're our marketing agency, they build the brand. So Cookies Retail and my team, we're not doing national campaigns. And a lot of the time, we're not even trying to build brand awareness in local markets. We're trying to build just awareness that we have a store because the brand is pretty recognizable. So we're very, very fortunate to, have the ability to work with such a strong and established brand. So a little bit about my background. I'm new to cannabis. So I've spent the last 20 plus years in fashion retail apparel. And I've been very fortunate to work for some great brands, Hot Topic, True Religion, Lucky Brand, Tom's, American Apparel. And I recently came from a startup, women's luxury startup, Tamara Mellon. So this is a big shift, in terms of, applying what I know to those, to cannabis and trying to absorb as much as possible, as quickly as possible and not screw anything up, especially because the stakes are so high with compliance. Coming from the fashion background too, I'm extremely familiar with the race to the bottom on promos that Mikaela brought up. It's just brutal, being on the brand side in fashion and apparel. It's just, yeah. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So my approach, what I'm going to talk about is kind of how I've chosen to approach coming to cannabis and a multi-state operator brand from a fashion background. And the first thing that I do is I take a 50% rule. So 50% of what you know is wrong and 50% is right. You just don't know which 50% yet. And so you have to figure that out. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the way that I start figuring that out is to ask some simple questions. And this is just sort of an exercise that, you should always do. So this may be easier to do from a brand perspective. So great, you're a brand, you have a story, you exist, why? You have to raise awareness for your brand. So does your customer know who your brand, that you exist? Are you culturally relevant? So they basically, there's a relationship between all of these quadrants. They all relate to each other in different ways. So you can kind of go through the permutations of this based on what you're trying to do. Do you know who your target customer is? Are they aware of your brand? Did you make the right product for that customer? A lot of times in fashion brands, you end up wanting a different customer than the one that you actually have, so that's been a huge thing. It's a shockingly common theme in, brands that I've worked for. And then, is what you're doing culturally relevant? Is it the Super Bowl? Is it Black History Month? Is it, and should you even communicate during those times? So there's a lot of things that, you need to ask yourself before you even get into a marketing mix or, channel strategy and content and stuff. So for us, we're really trying to make the customer aware of, not the brand, but that we have a retail location in your area. So diving down from that, now that you have a goal in mind, I like to use the Peso framework, and that's from, you can see it down there, a site called Spin Sucks. It's mostly a PR kind of centric website and blog. They do a lot of cool webinars and features. So definitely check them out. So the point of Peso is that you don't need to do all of these things. You can see all of these bullet points, are listed on the side of what all rolls up into paid and what rolls up into earned and owned. The point isn't that you need to do all of those things. You just need to pick the right ones, and you need to have a somewhat balanced strategy. So a lot of people immediately go to paid because it's the most scalable, it's the most measurable, and even that is challenging, right? We just, like Mikaela just mentioned and Amy talked about. The problem with paid is very low credibility and trust. People don't really trust ads, so you need earned media, you need shared media, you need to give people a reason to trust. So if your friend shares something with you, that is a high level of trust, but it's hard for us to get your friend to share something with you, right? So that's not really as scalable as paid. So you're constantly balancing all these things out. And owned media, in the case of, let's just talk about like Peloton, like they have a huge library of content, it's like their owned media is like a huge reason like why you would go to Peloton, so that can be your website information, whatever. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so what I like to do here is kind of overlay, once you have an idea of like what your channel mix is, I kind of overlay it against the customer journey, or you can start the opposite way. You can start with the customer kind of funnel or loop journey. So I'll just kind of talk through that really quickly. And I think John's going to cover this too a little bit later. So people have to be aware that you exist. They need to know that you're selling a product or service, which they will consider whether or not they'll buy it. And the most interesting thing for me here is the research and discovery loop. So if you think about scrolling Instagram, you'll click on an ad, read the comments, check out the website, then go back to Instagram. You'll spend 2 hours reading product reviews for a toaster oven on Amazon and not buy one. So we're in a digital world where you're constantly in this loop and then not doing anything. So what's really important there is, capturing those people that have even made it to that point. So, SMS, display retargeting, those are things like once that person has identified themselves to you in a contactable way, you really need to capitalize on that. Obviously, there's a point of purchase, and then does your brand or product live up to the promise? So in cannabis for us, reviews like on Google, like that's how we get SEO value, because we can't advertise the dispensaries. So, all these things kind of play into each other. Then post-purchase and loyalty program is once you can see this is very heavily front loaded on awareness and consideration. And that's because it's harder to acquire customers than it is to retain them. And it's much more expensive. So it looks out of balance from that perspective. So this isn't necessarily meant to say that you should put all of your time into, awareness and consideration. You actually should really put a lot of time into, post-purchase and loyalty. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Not even looking at my own notes. I'm probably missing stuff, but okay. So we're an MSO. I typically come from an organization where marketing looks more like the centralized diagram on the left, where you're a brand and you're pushing out content from a centralized marketing team. And that's really not the case for cookies retail. One of the big reasons for that too, like why we can't just shoot out content all day long for all our different stores, is they all have different inventory all the time, even within the same state, even within 3 miles of each other or whatever. We don't have stores within 3 miles, but you get the idea. They'll have different inventory, so we don't half the time we don't even know what's in the store, as the marketing team. Like stuff shows up COD, like new product, and we find out, I'll talk about it in a second, from the stores usually is how that a lot of the content gets generated. So you can ask yourself, I guess, when you look at our presence, our Instagram presence, you'll notice that every store has their own Instagram account. And, we're in the process of opening, 20-ish stores this year. We already have 10. So, and there's even multiple in a market, right? So we'll have 3 stores in Oklahoma City at some point. So you're going to ask yourself, like, why do you have 3 Instagram accounts for Oklahoma City? And we asked ourselves that too. And one of the big reasons, though, is Berner, our founder, he doesn't want to come off as corporate. He wants each store to have its own kind of look and feel. He calls it grimy. He wants it to feel, smell like a local dispensary, like just a neighborhood dispensary that, it sells cookies product. And I agree with that. So looking at the decentralized over on the right, we've come up with the idea, okay, maybe we make regional hubs, or, in the case of Instagram accounts getting shut down, regional hubs make a lot of sense, so that each store still maintains their own account because they have different things going on all the time, different customers, but maybe there's like a backup account that's regional. So when our Instagrams get taken down, which they do, we can relaunch it with a backup regional account. Other challenges, obviously compliance. I shouldn't have glossed over that one. That was actually first in my notes, but I think you guys are aware of all that. So I'm not an expert on compliance. I don't come from the cannabis world, so I really look to partners, like Jon or Mikaela, to really help when we're searching for, technology or agency or whatever that is, like we're really looking for people that have already figured this out and that are the experts, from a multi-state perspective. So that's super important to me. And I'm fortunate to work for a brand that has, the means to go do that, to find the right partners and spend the money. Systems and setup. So we have to build out the digital presence. So Weed Maps, Dutchie, Google Maps, Yelp, all those things, Instagram that I just mentioned, for all of these stores. So there's like hundreds of like micro tasks that all have to happen in a certain, sequence when you set up a store digitally. So that's something that's really fun to do. Analytics and reporting, especially when all of your most of your transactions happen offline. That's also another difficult, thing for attributing back, revenue to marketing. And again, that comes back to finding the right partners that can do that, which these guys have talked about or will talk about. I think the obvious one is like, different areas have different culture, so in a way that it makes a lot of sense for, stores to be able to generate their own content because they know like what's cool in their area and like, what slang is used and things like that, so like we can't become cultural experts on, every city that we have stores in overnight, so we really are leaning on the stores for some of that stuff too. And I'll have another few more points on that later. And the last is, if you're decentralizing your content creation process, how do you maintain brand standards? And that's usually the reason why people don't and try to force, an MSO structure into the centralized version on the left, which doesn't work for a lot of the reasons that I've spoken for a long time about. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So the advantages here, the main point again is like, we want to not come off as corporate. We want to come off as, local. So you can see here, there's like the Inland Empire cookies themed apparel. We have some San Diego themed apparel. So we really lean in, we have limited edition merchandise, cookies themed for each market that we're in. We really want to come across as part of the community, and authentic. And, a lot of times too, it's like when we open in a new state, we're moving in on someone's territory. Like there's like players that are already established there. And we're coming in, as the big corporate brand, so we do a lot of community outreach, and we really try to find ways to, represent the local community. One of the great ways that we do that is we also work with brand partners, also known as influencers. So we source local, people that have a pretty good Instagram following, and we work with them on content and activation. So right now we're opening a store in Oklahoma City tomorrow. We have a bunch of our brand partners showing up. One of them's bringing like a low rider car club, and things like that. So like we're really activating the community and the brand partners. And then what you're doing there is you're creating a hub for Instagram. So if they're all commenting and liking our content and vice versa, you're sending signals to the Instagram algorithm that people want this content. So you'll reach more people with your content. So that the idea is it covers a lot of bases, right? And they know what's cool in their area too. So it's not up to us to come up with a marketing plan, and have to figure out like, hey, is this cool? Is this not cool? The brand partners come up with a lot of great ideas as well. So what you can kind of see here is each store creates their own content. And we also work with them on, kind of guidelines and, do's and don'ts. And like, we give them feedback on what gets the highest engagement, what's working from that standpoint. And we found by far that what gets the most engagement is when you show the people in the stores. So people holding the product, people in in an environment that, feels like, it's a local retail environment, not just, content that we created from thousands of miles away and they're posting. The other thing with that is Burner, there are a lot of really cool assets. We kind of have the opposite problem of what Mikaela was talking about. Our corporate team creates a lot of awesome assets. And Burner doesn't want every store to post, a crazy animation on the same day. He wants it to feel different when he's scrolling. He doesn't want everyone to look exactly the same. So we're actually told not to do that. So like another reason why we have to work so hard on generating our own content. And then the other part of that is we're kind of doing the reversed centralized thing. The stores submit the content and they go through kind of a filter and a process, and then we end up doing the posting for them. There's a lot of reasons for that, right? A lot of it is compliance. Stores are not all compliance experts in what they can and can't do on social media. So we have to be really, really careful, try not to get our accounts taken down, but still leverage the stores as content creators. We do let them activate on community response. So we, you have them, they all have a login to Sprout Social, and they respond to questions that only the store could answer. So what's the THC content? Is this still there? Like, what are your hours? Things like that. So we let the store handle those questions. Okay, I think we can go to, so brand challenges. One thing that's also a unique challenge to us that, Jon actually pointed out is that our brand kind of appeals to children in an industry where that's a big no-no. So we actually are not able to use some of our strongest assets depending on the channel, especially on a lot of the paid channels. The other issue here is SEO, right? Cookies has inherently terrible SEO value because we don't sell actual cookies. We sell cannabis. So that's another issue with a strong brand. I don't think Berner was thinking about SEO when he created the brand. And also, like all of our products, Gelati, Georgia Pie, Cereal Milk, Gary Payton, Georgia Pie, those are all real things that are that are not cannabis. So even our products have terrible SEO value. So that's something that we're constantly, what do you do? Like we're always asking ourselves that when we do our marketing plans. And that's it for me.
That's awesome, Bryan. It's so interesting to see, the challenges. Everybody, I think, kind of assumes a brand like Cookies just kind of has it easy, kind of has it, made in the shade. But I think the approach that you guys take is so different, and there's definitely some learnings there for everyone. But as someone who's worked in marketing for 100 years and now works for a compliance company, one of the things that you said that really resonates with me, that I think is, kind of the perfect segue to Jon, is that, our clients, or not my clients anymore. I'm not an agency anymore, but our cannabis brands and retailers, they're experts in retail and they're experts in cannabis. They're not necessarily going to be experts in compliance and advertising compliance and all of the types of things that, we have to take into consideration to be successful with our advertising. And that's why it's so great to have people like Mikaela and Jon at Surfside that can help, kind of help us navigate those compliance and complexities. So Jon, I'd love to, turn it over to you for a few minutes and get your take on digital compliance and all those fun things that we have to navigate.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bryan, for the kind words, and thanks everyone else for attending and presenting so far. But yeah, as far as compliance goes, there's so many different ways to take it. And when you look at a specific example like Cookies across multiple different states, and you've got different regulations in different states, different towns, different localities, what we like to do is kind of simplify it, because compliance is really kind of par for the course. You need to be compliant to deliver in order to execute campaigns, and then from there you want to perform. And so there's certain elements of compliance that actually even help performance from a certain standpoint. When you're looking at targeting the right consumers, you're targeting the right locations, utilizing the right content, all of this information can also be utilized in order to ensure that you're reaching the people that want to buy your product or visit your store or whatever it may be. And so when we break out compliance at Surfside, we really break it out in these three categories. We have creative, inventory, and targeting. And creative is like, what's the ad unit? Is it a text message? Is it a video? Is it a display ad? Is it a billboard? What is the content that you're going to be pushing and utilizing in order to reach that specific user? And so the majority of that creative, if I were to summarize kind of like the creative compliance, it's really, don't make false health claims. You obviously got to follow the state by state or local laws and regulations. And some different states are going to have disclaimers. Like in California, you need to include your license number visible in the ad. Where in Washington, you've got a number of different disclaimers that you need to include. And that changes on kind of depending on where you're delivering your ad. But there's a number of different things that, as Bryan mentioned before, not targeting or trying to appeal to minors, and that could be an ice cream or a balloon or a cartoon or a depiction. And so that makes it sometimes very difficult for a company like Cookies, because of the brands and kind of the way that they operate and what's been so successful for them, leans into some of that kind of the imagery that might be construed to be focused on that. But obviously there's different ways around that in order to present certain elements that avoid kind of gray areas or touchy topics. Another thing within the creative is when you look at like all the different mechanisms that you can reach or influence a user, you've got desktop, mobile, tablet, emails, out of home, digital out of home, TV, radio, text messaging, email, whatever it may be. And so making sure that you've got messaging, whether it's consistent messaging or whether it's starting to create this kind of sequential approach to be able to say, excuse me, they saw an ad on a billboard, and then once they saw billboard exposure, we want to target them with a different ad, or after a website exposure, we want to provide them with a different type of experience or content and retarget them with certain ads. There's always a great way to kind of merge your creative in order to create more relevance and more recognition to drive that engagement up. The second component we'll talk about is kind of inventory. So from an inventory perspective, besides having to look at the creative, a lot of that creative stuff is going to happen pre-launch. So whether it's an internal team you have, or whether it's a company like us who's handling the creative compliance and ensuring that you're following regulations before launch, it's very easy for us to ensure that those ads are compliant. But when you go to inventory, that's where it's really going to be reliant on whoever's executing that media for you. And from an inventory perspective, you have to ensure that in most states, it's 71.6% of your audience that you're reaching on that site or in that area over index for being 21. In certain states, it could be 85% or 70%, but that changes on a state-by-state basis. And the main idea here is that there should be some type of third-party element or verification that if you're going to run an ad on a HuffingtonPost.com, that 71.6% of that audience is going to be 21 plus to some degree. And whether that's a website or a mobile application, or you're going to be putting up a billboard in a certain zip code, you need to ensure that the inventory qualifies based on those, whatever that specific percentage is. This also kind of correlates into targeting. And so not only do you need to ensure that you're reaching the right inventory, but you also need to ensure that the targeting is appropriate as well. And this is something that really doesn't get talked about a lot from a compliance standpoint, where a lot of the focus has always been on the creative, what you can say or what you can't show. Like you can't show consumption pretty much in any state, but in some states you can show flower and some states you can't. But targeting is pretty much also pretty clean cut across state lines, where you're not allowed to target locations that over-index for minors, like schools or certain public properties or federally owned buildings. And so think of like public transportation hubs, stuff like that. A lot of those locations are supposed to be avoided and suppressed from your targeting. And so being able to work with a partner that's able to ensure that these type of ads or these types of promotions aren't run in those areas, it requires not more than kind of a pre-check. Once you launch the campaign, you have to really understand the type of inventory you're providing, the inventory you're reaching, but also where you're reaching these people. And so having this idea of location or identity or consumer insights intelligence behind the execution of the campaign, it really helps you understand that, all right, I know that this is, let's say it's a mother or father who went to a dispensary, and we've already identified them as being someone who's an existing customer or competing customer, or had visited a website to buy delivery or e-com historically. But then ensuring that you don't reach that same user while they're at a school or in an area that's been deemed illegal is another aspect to remaining compliant with your campaigns. And so having this idea of location and intelligence around the presence of where these devices are or where these users exist is also very important. I think like one of the big things recently has been the out-of-home billboards coming down on interstate highways in California. There's been a lot of press around that. And so that kind of just ties that all together. As far as data compliance goes, we look at your ad compliance or your creative compliance, and then you have data compliance. This kind of is something that people generally don't think about as well. And so a lot of these campaigns, especially with COVID, it accelerated the need for brands to talk directly to customers. I know, the first third of this was really, from Mikaela's end, was really focused on how Springbig is now offering the brand's product. And brands are more and more looking to have that direct relationship with consumers, because less consumers are going into retailers and relying on the bud tender. So owning that relationship is becoming very important. And there's platforms out there that are helping facilitate the sale directly for brands, whether it's through delivery platforms, different e-commerce platforms that sit right within a brand's website. And so being able to communicate directly with these consumers from a data perspective has become very important. But with that, with any e-commerce and direct consumer messaging, from that kind of those models that we were looking at through Bryan, like retargeting is a very big aspect of that. Bringing people who've been to your site, who have added an item to your cart, maybe abandoned cart or made a purchase. The idea of making sure that you continue to message them once they leave with that same product, this kind of idea of advertising or marketing personalization is very important, because you want to ensure that the people who are visiting your site, these unknown customers who haven't converted yet, they do come back and convert. And with these kind of more downstream tactics, these we call them kind of mid-funnel, lower funnel tactics, you have to ensure that you've got the right privacy policies in place. So you have a website terms and conditions. Are you informing the users of your site that there's third-party ad tracking or cookies installed? There's a lot of changes that are happening right now with third-party ad tracking, the IDFA with Apple's devices, and kind of the different ways that all these different providers are going to be allow you to deliver interest-based ads. But really, at kind of rather than going into the very, very specifics of it, being able to understand that if you're going to be running some really standard core tactics, like retargeting being something that we run pretty much with all of our clients, it's important to ensure that you do have a website terms and conditions, you have a privacy policy in place, you're very upfront about allowing customers to opt out, so they can opt out of receiving interest-based ads. And there's some core things that you need to communicate to the users that visit your properties in order to safely be able to retarget and continue messaging them without worrying about being in breach of just standard kind of advertising or data compliance issues that go well beyond cannabis and are applicable to just all advertising industries and verticals. One of the other things that we kind of wanted to touch on, because I know a lot of this has been really focused on direct to consumer, was how we can start looking at this from a B2B standpoint. So when you look at Surfside as a business as well, we have a lot of customers who come to us and want to tap into all the users that we have access to, anyone really with a connected device, where they live, where they work, activities that are taken online, and how can we then shift the context that we're layering on top of these devices or these people, because they also have jobs, they work at certain industries. You have cultivators, you've got dispensary business owners, you've got manufacturers, you've got decision makers at brands. And so a lot of times people will come to us, say, hey, can I reach these specific people? So there's a lot of different tactics as far as being able to look at the context or the data elements of a certain individual, so that you can run campaigns, whether it's prospecting or customer acquisition or retention, tailored to how you're building out an audience and the different attributes that you're utilizing to build these segments. So when we're looking at this funnel, why we found it kind of interesting for this discussion was that from a B2B, we tend to really focus on lead generation, getting people to fill out forms, getting people to once someone's on your site, retarget them. And so having those data compliance elements is really important, where you might not be as interested in or as necessary to run kind of consumer focused product, where you might be in the creative and cannabis D2C compliance conversation. We tend to find that the B2B campaigns, they fall a lot of the times into the data compliance structure. So using CRM lists, onboarding data that might come from a loyalty program or a CRM or an email newsletter that you have, to be able to say, all right, these are my existing customers. How do I use that to build a lookalike and find more customers, and vice versa? retarget people who are coming to my site. So really to look at and focus at these lower funnel metrics in order to drive kind of more one-to-one conversation, some of those more B2B campaign type of goals. But I know we're running up on time, so I can kind of toss it back to Amy and we could open it up for any questions or any Q&A time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jon. That's really insightful from, a compliance perspective. We do have time. If anybody still has questions, please load them up in the Q&A. But Mikaela, I'm going to kick the first one over to you from Jason regarding, is there a concern that, text messaging advertising will lose some of its appeal once we see more of these more mainstream reelers try to jump in? For example, if Whole Foods is texting everybody ads and promos, will people begin opting out of everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think at the end of the day, opt-outs are always a risk if your content is not relevant to the audience that you're sending it to. As we see more and more people start to collect phone numbers, I think we're going to see customers start to be a little bit more hesitant, and we have to present a value to the customer to opt in to begin with and to remain opted in. Cannabis retailers have been historically very smart about this because their phone number and that opt-in is typically what also joins them into the loyalty program. So the ask is very clear, right? Of, hey, you're joining, you're now in, and the risk is, well, if I opt out, I don't want to lose my points, or I don't want to lose access to these very exclusive promotions or specials I receive. So that's really the ticket. And I think that because cannabis retailers are so ahead of the game, they already know they have to segment their list, and I should only text people about the most relevant products, et cetera. So I don't see it as a ton of a risk to cannabis retailers as long as they're really managing the content and the messaging they're putting out the right way, which most of them are. Cannabis retailers are text experts, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, just tagging on. So I come from a very email heavy background, obviously. We're not even really considering doing email right now. So that's just not where our customer is. I'll probably regret saying that someday, but you never know, right? But our customer is just not an email customer. And the thing with cookies especially is we're a hype brand, so people want that text message. As long as we're careful with what we send, we provide value to them, they want to be in line to get the new drop, so make sure that you're providing value when you're messaging them, and that will help, not burn them out.
And piggybacking on that, here's the reality too. It's a lot cooler to get a text message about an eighth of weed than it is a sale on zucchini from Whole Foods. And I think that is a very real factor in cannabis. Is you might be fine having a little bit of FOMO about the Whole Foods promo, but not the dispensary promo. You don't want to miss out on that. And I think that is just a luxury that we have. Given all the reasons our jobs are hard in cannabis, it's nice to be able to identify the luxuries. And I think that's one of them. We've seen that with our referral program at Springbig for retailers. People are really excited to tell their friends about a great dispensary because it's pretty cool to be the girl that has, the hookup for the best weed, as opposed to like, hey, I have the best ophthalmologist. Are you looking for new glasses? So I think that's why we do see so much success with this. And, I think, Bryan, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, Bryan, that you made, and that Mikaela made too, it's all about the content. You have to have good content so you're not irritating your customers, whether it's email or text. You have to know where they are, and you have to have good content to keep their attention and keep them from unsubscribing, regardless of the delivery method. So thank you both for that. And Jon, I know you said you wanted to answer this question, but for anybody who's not on the Q&A, Steve asked, so many companies in this industry do their own marketing in-house. Can we please comment on how we view the roles of agencies in this field?
And it kind of it parlays into kind of what we were just discussing, because on that last question, because ultimately when you look at kind of burnout on anything, you never want to. People aren't again, we don't run SMS campaigns, but people are generally not sending SMS campaigns to their customers daily. There's a certain cadence there. And when you look at your SMS and then you couple it with whether it's email, whether it's paid media through digital, like through like a Surfside or other program, you start creating that mix. And so when you have your digital, your PR, your events, your SEO, your SMS, your loyalty program, all those are part of that kind of funnel that I showed on my slide, Bryan showed on his slide. These are not, it's not necessarily, these aren't revolutionary concepts. And, they're very proven out that there's this entourage effect where a lot of the campaigns that we run, let's say we're running a brand awareness campaign, what we'll see is a lot of people go to the site, they'll visit, and then we'll see that they'll return. And so like 80% of some of our conversions, whether it's an online sale or whether it's a visit to a store, it's happening after the third or the fifth visit to the site or the second visit, or it's informing people to then go to Google and search, and then Google's taking credit for it. But ultimately, the amount of all these different activities working together helps amplify the ability to drive customer acquisition or retention. And so when we talk about bringing these tools in-house, it's a very common trend happening across multiple different verticals. I think that what we've seen in cannabis is it's not quite there yet. We tend to find that a lot of people really do rely on whether it's an agency or an ad tech platform who's got managed service or kind of a white glove approach to it, really help and assist with the execution of that. And so being able to use the agency, we tend to find that the agencies really help with creative branding, positioning. They'll come up with sometimes like personas or demographics or segments that they want to kind of build upon or focus brand development around. And then we'll deploy that information or deploy that strategy or creatives or that approach to someone to help execute it, whether it's the PR agency or the marketing platform. But like we're a marketing platform and we still have a PR agency, so we tend to find that there's value and we still go to events, but when we're at the event, we're going to be running ads or we're going to having our PR agency letting people know we're at the event and doing a special promotion or whatever it may be. So that adding all that together, we tend to find that working with specialists really does provide a lot more value. And if you are going to bring it all in-house, there are certain tools out there that are going to make your life a lot easier. So whether it's making sure you've got the right measurement tools in place so you know what's working, what's not working, you've got a platform that's self-service so you can really execute, your search, your social, your SMS, your email, and then have like a customer data platform or some type of marketing hub that really helps aggregate everything for you. But down the road, those things kind of add up and you've got a lot of labor costs and a lot of people to support all those different initiatives.
Steve, I just want to layer on to that real quick because I come from the agency world. I've worked in agencies my entire career until I went in-house at Simplifya about 2 years ago. And I will say that coming from an agency perspective and now being in-house and being able to, potentially hire agencies, it's so important and it's so useful. I can't afford to build out an entire digital team and an entire PR team and an entire social media team. And it's not budget friendly. It's not financially feasible. So being able to rely on agencies, whether it's marketing, it's PR, it's events, to help me get things done in a way that's affordable and in a way that I know is going to represent my brand takes a huge load off of, me signing up trade show booths and that kind of stuff. So I would say the role of an agency, especially, in this industry is really to be a partner and I think to be a resource because, you can get so much more bandwidth from hiring an SEO, a digital marketing SEM agency than I can from hiring that person in-house. So I think that that's definitely still going to be an important relationship that will continue to be maintained. So I want to switch real quick and answer Laura's question about the spam can laws with texting. Mikaela, is that something you can answer real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. And there may be some other panelists that want to jump in on this. The can spam is more focused on email marketing, and text message marketing is actually regulated by TCPA compliance, which is more geared towards automated dialers, so phone calls and text messaging. And the main difference is that when you are emailing a customer, the can spam regulations are much more focused on how you identify yourself, tell people who you are, and your customers' ability to opt out. There's not much compliance on the email side focused on customers opting in. On the text messaging side, on the other hand, that again is governed by TCPA, and the TCPA compliance for text messaging, they have to be able to opt out the same way as they do in email marketing governed by CAN-SPAM. On the text messaging side, we also have to have that consent to start texting them. So before we can send them anything, we have to know that they wanted that communication from us, where on the email side, if you have somebody's email address, you could just start emailing them. So it's a little bit more on the opt-in side. And we provide our retailers that are building the database with everything they need to have the right consent. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Oh, I can tag on to that really quickly. Yeah. So we are very, we only do double opt-ins, right? That's the only people that we'll ever market to, is people that respond yes to the first opt-in message. The other thing is we also put a link to our privacy policy in the first opt-in message. So you've at least had a chance to, and our privacy policy is, like Jon brought up earlier, it's like you need to have one, and ours is very comprehensive, so that also helps cover you right up front.
Awesome. I think we've got most of the questions answered. Are there any other last minute questions that somebody wants to throw up? Otherwise, I think we're pretty close to time, Bryan.
Yeah, I think so. If anybody has any questions that they wanted to post to the board, we'll try and get them in really quickly. But if they do come in over the next 5 minutes or so while we're closing down the program, just do note that all the panelists will be provided these post-event, and we'll continue the conversation with any outstanding questions when we first post our recording of today's program inside of NCIA Connect, our members-only community platform. So if you're not an NCIA member and currently participating in today's program, you'll definitely want to consider joining NCIA so you can carry on the conversation immediately with the panelists inside that platform. But if there aren't any more questions that have come in, I think, Amy, you can lead the panel in final thoughts, and then we'll close out today's program.
Great. Well, I will turn it over to our panelists, ask them each to give us a quick final thought, recommendation, subject that, kind of got brought up during the conversation that you wanted to make sure to address. And I'm going to go in reverse order this time. So we'll start with you, Mikaela. Any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you to everybody for joining. And if you are thinking about engaging in a digital communication journey with customers, please reach out. If there's any way that springbig can be a resource, we are certainly here to help. Feel free to email me or visit us online.
Great, thank you. Bryan, you're up.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. And I'm mad at myself. I missed something on one of my slides. That's one of my favorite things. So the brand, customer, product, culture thing. Pick two. Keep it simple. That's the main message that I wanted to get across from that slide. Like, you can't establish all the 4 things in one message. It's just not possible. Especially you have 0.2 seconds of someone scrolling on their phone or whatever. So yeah, keep it simple and keep it relevant.
Yeah, in terms of 0.2 seconds, don't pull a Burger King, right? Okay, Jon, you're up.
I never have any good final words, so I hope that we all talk again so I don't have to have any final words for anyone. But thanks everyone for joining. Bryan, thanks for coming on. Mikaela as well. Amy, thanks for hosting.
Great. Thank you all to our fabulous panelists. I learned so much today. I hope you guys found it educational. Bryan and Brooke with NCIA, thank you so much for hosting. Thanks to everyone, all of the attendees who joined, and we look forward to being in touch with you all soon.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, Amy, for moderating today's session and leading this panel of esteemed experts in such an insightful conversation this afternoon. Huge thanks to you, Jon, Bryan, and Mikaela as well for taking the time out of your all's busy schedule to jump on this panel with Amy.